Where do you think we're currently at with masculinity right now?
I think in general, especially in the West, it's very, very confusing. I think a lot of young boys, a lot of young men are very confused about what it means to be a man, and rightfully so. I think if I was an 18-year-old, 16-year-old, 21-year-old guy in today's culture, I'd be like, what the hell do you want from me? Like, what does culture expect from me? What does society want from me? What do women want from me? Like, this is all very, very confusing because there's so many narratives. And I think that there's two big pieces that stand out to me. Number one, I think we've entered into one of the very first periods of maybe human history. That might be a bold statement, but I think we've entered into one of the main times where what it means to be a man and masculinity itself is being largely defined by women and not by men. And so young boys are growing up being taught, this is how you should be as a man. This is what good masculinity is. This is what a good man looks like. But it is predominantly coming from women. And it's not that women can't inform, what it looks like to be a good man, but it's something that there's a lot missing. There's something to be missed. Just like we wouldn't expect men to teach young girls how to be a woman, or what it looks like to be female or to be feminine. We're just going to miss out on something that is deeply experiential in what it's like to walk through the world. So I think that's one piece. And then I think the second piece is how it looks or what it looks like to be a man or to be masculine or masculinity in general. We've gone through a period of, we used to have this very almost hyper rigid version of like, here's what you need to do in order to be a man. And if you step outside of these confines, you're not a man or you're not a good man. And it was very, very rigid. But we've gone through a flipping of that, which is that in the last 10 years, what so many men have experienced is just don't do all of these things. So if you want to be a man, if you want to be a good man, here's the laundry list of crap that you shouldn't do. And if you just don't do any of these things, then maybe you're a good man, maybe you're masculine. So the problem with that is that that creates a massive void. That doesn't actually tell you here's how you can operate. Here are some good principles. Here are some good values or morals that you can operate by. Here's an aim and a direction that you can have in life. Here's how you can be of service to community and culture or the people around you and family. It just says, don't do all this stuff. And so outside of that, that doesn't actually give a young man any direction. And so he's just left with the like, okay, here's all the things that I'm going to get flack from online, from women, social media, maybe other men, but it doesn't actually give me anything to aim at. And part of being a man, part of really connecting to a masculine core, in my opinion, is having something to aim at. It's having a direction that you're moving towards. But if your direction is just don't do all these things, that's not actually an aim. That's not actually directional. It's more chaotic. It's more ambiguous, and it's more shame-inducing. And so I think the last thing that I would say, and then I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, is that there is a massive culture of seeing men and masculinity as the fundamental core problem of existence. And this is a really big issue because we can look socially at women's problems and say, hey, women are struggling. We socially and as a society should do something about that to support them. Maybe it's through legislation, maybe it's through social programs, but we should do something collectively to support them. Whereas with men's issues, when boys and men are struggling with something, the social narrative is often, what are they doing to cause this? They need to fix themselves. And so we step out of, let's provide social support. We have a social obligation. We can clearly see young boys, men are in decline in many, many different ways. And what ends up happening is, well, just pick yourself up by your bootstraps. And there's this, I call it the patriarchy virus, which is the notion that the patriarchy is the bane of all existence and that men are struggling because of the patriarchy. And if only they got out from underneath that, everything would be solved and everything would be fixed. And for a lot of young boys, they hear this, and what they interpret, and a lot of men hear this as well, and what they interpret is, well, I am just a man. I can't fundamentally change that. And what you're saying, or what society is largely saying, or culture is largely saying, is I'm the fundamental problem. So what do I do with that? How do I fix my inherent nature? I didn't choose to be born a man. I just was. Here I am. And that's kind of the approach that I think a lot of young men are experiencing. And so you see them checking out. You see them checking out from dating, from higher education. You see them checking out from the workforce. You see them checking out from society and socializing. And I get it. I kind of understand it to a degree, because shame is the literal worst tool to try and get any type of change or correction. Shame is a tool that we use psychologically when we are trying to enforce compliance. And that has become a very common thread within social conversations today. It's just shame to try and get compliance.
Do you think there's a fear of talking about what it's like to be a man or the problems of being a man? Or do you think that fear is increasing because of all of this?
I think that generally a lot of men, what they experience is maybe there's some fear about talking about the issues that they're facing, whether it's individually or when we talk about issues socially. But that fear is usually backed up with the experience of talking about men's issues or boys' challenges with a lot of hostility and vitriol that gets thrown at people online. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've talked about, the impact of fatherless homes as an example on young boys, and just had so much hate thrown at me, and not because I'm saying anything, ridiculous. I'm just talking about the data. I'm just saying, here's the research that we found. This has a disproportionate impact on young boys when a father's not present in the house. It's very damaging for young boys. And it's almost like if you're not couching the conversation about young boys and young men, or just men in general, in, women's issues matter too, and maybe this affects women as well, then you generally seem to receive a lot of hostility. So I do think that a lot of men are hesitant to talk about these things. They're fearful that they're going to get labeled as a misogynist online, or they're going to get, some type of anger directed towards them. And then I think the other thing that a lot of guys experience, which causes them to not talk about these things, is just a general empathy gap. That when we look at, again, mostly when we look at female issues online, there's a lot of empathy towards their plight and the challenges that they're facing. And there's a lot of willingness to look at those issues through a lens of empathy. And there's a lot of requesting that we have empathy, right? Especially as men, it's like you should have empathy for what women are going through. And I get that. I agree with that, right? There are some challenges that women face that we do absolutely need to have empathy around. However, when the inverse is there, I think what a lot of men experience is there isn't any real empathy for what men are facing and what men experience, or what it's like to be a man. And so the general consensus is kind of like, well, why should I bother when people don't really seem to care? And that's what I see a lot online on my comments, on YouTube, on my podcast, where guys are like, yeah, I don't talk about this stuff because when I have, the general consensus is lacking in empathy, and it's almost hostile towards me. And I'll give you one example because um, I can't remember the researcher's name, but there's a researcher, I think out of Stanford, that uh, that was looking at how much social time men need in order to feel and experience a good level of fulfillment in their life and mental health. And what they found, I think it was Dr. Robin Drucker, I believe, Dr. Robin Drucker. And what they found was that men need, on average, 2 times a week to spend time with their male friends in order to have the optimal level of mental health and socialization. And when that study came out, when you looked at the comment sections of the posts and what a lot of women were saying, it was heinous. It was insane. It was like, oh, little boys need their boy time and they need to go play with their little boyfriends. And why do men even need this? And men have everything. And why do they need blah, blah, blah? And it was ridiculous. It was insane. It was all, and all it was saying was guys need to spend time together, and that's beneficial for their mental health. And you would think that as a society, we would want men to be mentally healthy. And you would think that women that want to date men would want men to be mentally healthy. But when we put data out and we show the impact of loneliness as an example, right? 15% of men can't identify a best friend. They can't identify one close friend, right? That's a lot of men that do not have a best or close friend. And again, when this data and information came out and the research came out, a lot of the comment sections, from a lot of women, but from some men as well, was really negative, and it's really harmful. And so there's just this empathy gap that I think a lot of men experience when they're trying to talk about either their personal individual issues or when we're trying to talk about these social issues that men as a group are facing.
What would empathy towards a man look like in your eyes?
An understanding and an acknowledgement that what that man is going through is actually challenging. I mean, sometimes it's just that simple. It's just that simple to say, yeah, man, like what you're going through sucks. I see this all the time with men that are going through like, divorce courts or divorce systems where they're getting, raked over the coals. They're losing half their net worth. They don't have access to their kids. They're broken because of it. They want to see their children. They're not being granted the same access. And, the general consensus online is, well, maybe he's just a deadbeat dad. Maybe he doesn't care about his kids. And I think that what men are looking for in those moments is just an acknowledgement of, yes, what you're going through is brutal and it's hard. And the challenges that you face as a man actually are in many ways different from what women face. And that those things are challenging, right? Whether it's loneliness or going through divorce or not being able to, like, whatever the plight is. So I think that's one piece. And I think the second piece is we can have empathy in policy. We can have empathy in legislation. An example of this that I think has been talked about a number of times, especially by somebody like Richard Reeves, is I think in the UK you guys call it red shirting, right? Are you from the UK? I just made an
I am
assumption.
from the UK. Yeah,
Yeah, okay. I've gotten pretty good at
I've got a slight Australian twang, but I'm
yeah.
British.
uh, and this is the notion that young men, young boys, do not do as well in school when they have to sit stationary throughout the day. But also the notion that because a young boy's prefrontal cortex develops slower than a young girl's, he's going to struggle. So if you have a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy that go into school at the same time, statistically speaking, that young boy is going to struggle to keep pace in the same way that that young girl is going to, because she has an easier time sitting still, focusing on a task, being able to memorize things. And that young boy will need active interruptions to listening, to learning. And I have a 4-year-old son. I see this all the time. He needs way more breaks than the girls that he's going to school with. They can sit and color for 20, 30 minutes. He can color for 10 to 12 minutes, and then he needs to go, smash a fire truck or like, kick his airplanes around or something like that and move his body. And then he can come back and do the same thing. But we haven't structured our school systems, our education like that. And we often are putting boys into school too soon. So those are just some examples of empathy online in real life, being able to say, yeah, man, that is hard. That is a challenge that men face that is different from women. And then I think in our policy and our legislation, also being able to support boys in acknowledging that how they maybe learn, that our developmental structure is a little bit different. I think that is also empathy.
I see this in a range of different ages at the moment, just because I personally feel we're in this space where men are balancing these two messages that are kind of being thrown out to them. This stoicism type version of themselves, but also this soft version of themselves. So the real balance between this idea of strength and vulnerability, and kind of looking at it and going, I don't know which way to turn, I don't know which one to do. But also, I feel that the strength one or the stoicism route seems to be a more natural route for them to want to take, because maybe they feel they're going to get more admiration from it. Maybe they're going to get more, um, they're going to get better feeling from it. I don't know, or achievement from it. But the softness side, I while I think the message has been sent out there enough now that people want to sort of appreciate vulnerability in men, the challenge still comes that, like you're saying, it's going to be thrown back at me when I am. It's going to be pushed back, and whether it's because the person on the other end of a man being vulnerable doesn't like what is being said,
Yeah.
or made it feel like that strong individual shouldn't have problems because they are the creator of the problems. I feel like that's why we're seeing so young men want to move down this stoic road, which is either, I don't know, whether it's isolating themselves or getting into ideologies that aren't healthy for them.
Yeah, well, when you push an extreme onto an entire sex, they are naturally going to rebel against that with an opposing extreme, right? So if you're telling an entire generation of men, young boys, the solution to all your problems is to be more vulnerable, and all those young boys go out and they try and be vulnerable, and the result is their girlfriends break up with them, maybe they're made fun of, they're ridiculed, they're met with hostility, the, they're not actually taught how to do that in a way that feels good for them, and so they just kind of emotionally dump on the people around them because they're not actually being taught, "Here's how you have some dominion over your emotions. Here's how you have some emotional mastery and emotional intelligence." They're not being taught that. They're just being told, and this is in my book. I wrote a book called Men's Work, and I had a whole chapter called The Myth of Male Vulnerability. And in it, I talk about this, that, in large part, one of the major challenges that young men and men are facing in our culture today is that they're being taught that vulnerability is the ultimate solution to all of their problems. If only men were more vulnerable, then all of the shit that they're dealing with would just naturally disappear. And every man knows that that's a load, right? Every guy, every man that has lived life knows that there are moments in time where if you are vulnerable as a man, you're going to pay a price. And that's a truth. And that's a truth that a lot of women have a hard time understanding because that's not the same case for them. Maybe that shows up in a corporate or work environment for some women, but socially, with men, with their female friends, that's largely not quite the case. Again, that's a generalization. There's definitely exceptions to that. But for the most part, it's just a very different experience. And so, for a lot of young guys, there's just these two hyper extreme polarities that are being dunked in their face constantly, right? One is be super soft, be really vulnerable, be really feminine, and women will like you, society will accept you, you won't be in any trouble, you'll be seen as a good man, and you won't ruffle any feathers. But that man is disconnected from a part of himself that he knows is inherently true, which is a more assertive, direct way of orienting in the world. And the other side is the antithesis of the first, right? It's like hyper direct, cut off from emotions. Emotions make you weak. Just get the women in the Bugattis and like F the rest. Don't worry about anything. Do whatever that you need to do to get to the top, cutthroat style, lacking compassion and empathy for the most part. But it also is very appealing to young men. Like, I gotta say, if I was 19 in today's world, I get why people like Andrew Tate. I get it. That would have appealed to me as an 18-year-old that bought a 1,000 cc motorcycle and was doing 300 kilometers an hour on the street trying to sort out who I was in the world. So, I think we have to find a merger between the two. We have to, as men, start to remember that part of being masculine, part of being a man is structure and softness. It's strength and understanding our weaknesses. We can't kill off our weaknesses. We actually have to understand them. And in that is mastery. This is what the Stoics were actually talking about, right? It's not ignore your weaknesses. And this has become a prominent part of male culture, which is their strength and suppression. If you just stuff stuff down, if you ignore how you feel, if you smoke enough weed, if you drink enough booze, if you watch enough porn, you can just rid yourself of those feelings and you don't have to deal with them. But that doesn't work, right? We all know that does not work. And so there's truth in both of the extremes that are being given to men, but it's just so layered in garbage and political ideology and all of these other agendas that it's very hard, I think, for a lot of young men to discern, like, what should I believe? And so I really, I really feel for a lot of young guys today, because it must be, I mean, even as a 42-year-old man with 2 kids and a family and like a successful business, there's times where I'm like, man, I can just imagine being a young boy in today's world and be so confused about what the world wants from me, what society expects from me, trying to figure out what women wants, at the best of times is confusing and challenging. But I think in today's world, I mean, that just must be brutal for young boys that are trying to find some very clear pathway and answer.
I even look at young boys that are in very similar places to where I was when I was trying to get into professional sports. So a lot of young boys that are trying to do something similar. And I see that environment being so different, but also the way they act within that environment actually a hindrance for them getting to what they want, which is they professional sport is just it's gladiatorial. It,
Yeah.
it is an arena, and you cannot go into that without that kind of mindset. And there is an element where if I break down the character that I was when I was playing sport, and I have done this with romantic partners where I've told them the person you're talking to and you are experiencing right now in this 35-year-old body is not the 20-year-old that was playing professional sport into my mid 20s.
Mm.
That was a different character because I needed to be, because I would only have got that achievement through some of the ways of being that I was. And I needed to do that. Otherwise, if I went into it with a slightly softer, more vulnerable approach, I'd have been eaten alive. And that is truth. That is reality. And there will be many people that are in the sports well-being world that will say, no, that's not true. It doesn't have to be like that. And I would say, have you been in that environment? And have you tried to succeed in that environment? It does not mean that when you move away from it, you can't soften and you can't lighten yourself and you can't be vulnerable. Actually, an analogy I kind of use in a sort of fictional metaphor is King Leonidas from the film Elite 300. I always say if you watch that film, people always think of the six packs, the blood, the guts, the shields, the swords, but they forget about the moment before they go out into battle where he is sitting with his wife in the bedroom and doubting himself. And it's his queen that actually has to bring some sort of strength to him in that moment of vulnerability.
Mm.
And that's a moment. That's a moment where you see that sort of vulnerability. But then the next morning he rises, he's with his brave 300 and they go out to war. And there's this kind of knowing when to turn it on and off. And the confusion I see now of young boys or even young men that are trying to figure out, when do I turn this on? When do I need to be strong? When do I need to be vulnerable? And then the thing I would add is that you were saying earlier that a lot of this, what it means to be a man, has been designed by women, has been spoken about by women. And I think the missing piece, when I've spoken to female friends, partners, where I've said, when you want a man to be vulnerable, have you actually told them what it looks like? Because men are very simple. We need an instruction manual. And I feel that's the one thing that we were missing a little bit is how to be vulnerable. What does it look like? Tell us what it looks like so that we know we can do that, and we will do our best to do that, because all they want to do is try and help you, please you, and provide. And I think there's probably the missing piece there from women, which is how do we show vulnerability? And then in that, are you ready for what that looks like? Because I think they're just throwing it out there and just hoping that it's right.
But I think you're pointing to a problem, which I agree with. And I don't know if I would agree with the solution. I think that modeling vulnerability needs to actually come from other men.
I agree. Yeah.
Not something that women should be telling us necessarily, because one, it's so different for every woman. Two, some women don't know what that really looks like because they've never really seen it modeled for them in a healthy way, right? Maybe they had a very avoidant dad or whatever. But three, there is a very important part of masculinity and being a man that is something that is transmitted to us, something that's modeled for us. And you know, I do think it is about that balance. And when you're talking about the Spartans, this is the interesting thing about men throughout history is that men were savages on the one hand, like complete warrior, uh, whatever, kings. And on the other hand, they were very connected to what we would consider to be more traditionally feminine, right? The Spartans, they would practice, like they had this, I think it was called Goji, which was their training camp for the young boys. So like when a young boy was going to become a warrior for the Spartan clan, they would go through this traditional training. And what it looked like was in the morning, you would do physical activity, you would train with your sword, you would train with your shield, you would train with the other boys. But then in the afternoon, you would have dance lessons, you would have writing and poetry lessons, you would sing music. This was a very common thing throughout history for boys and men, was that we understood that to just be one way, to just be one thing, this killing machine or this warrior machine, is to miss out on a very integral part of what it means to be a whole or complete man. So yes, develop the warrior, absolutely. As you're talking about within sports, I mean, I played hockey up until juniors, and I was a defenseman. I was, the scrapper, and, which was a lot of fun. Uh, but I also sang, and did music. And so I think that's something that a lot of young men could benefit from, which is exploring, like, yeah, go to Muay Thai. I love that. I do Muay Thai every single week. I still do. But also explore this other avenue, not to impress women, not for any of those other reasons, but so that you understand how to balance being in the seat of strength, of structure, but also being able to explore what it feels like to move into a sense of softness and ease and grace and compassion. And that will serve you extremely, extremely well, because for a lot of young boys, what they're really grappling with is they're being they're in the middle of this tug of war between the two extremes. And what they actually need to find is some level of developing both of them within themselves in a way that has some level of mastery or some level of dominion over them.
Yeah, I think there's a modern day version of that in Alexander Usyk. He's the heavyweight world champion of the world, undisputed, and he, being a physical warrior, literally going into fight, I don't know if you know much about boxing, but he actually became so skilled through a traditional Ukrainian dance. And it was that dance that's actually helped him develop an ability to bob and weave and get out of the way of opponents. But then he's really good at putting out some of his training camps. And if you look at him in his training camps, he's really creative in those moments. It's almost like artistic in what he does. And there's almost nothing off the table. And I have no doubt there's a lot of things that will be not shown to the cameras where he's hiding a lot of his secrets. And there's so much power in that, because on the face of it, if you're just a young person want to go into boxing, you're like, oh, I just got to hit pads, I just got to hit faces, like this is going to be me. It's like, well, actually, if you started doing some dance, you could be world champion of the world. It's like, what? Would I really? And he's a great example. And again, especially from a nation that's very, very seen as masculine, and the idea of a man is this sort of old school tough guy, bulletproof vests, quite literally in a war in their nation.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we need to be able to develop some level of grace. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to work with some extremely successful men from sports, NFL, NHL, to hedge fund financial guys, to, some of the top artists, singers, rappers, musicians in the world. And the main thing that a lot of those folks struggle with, a lot of those guys struggle with when they come to work with me, is that two things. One, they've been using shame to motivate themselves, right? So they have some chip on their shoulder and they're trying to prove somebody wrong, which for a period of time can work really well, and then it, doesn't. But two, they lack some level of internal compassion, and this is a very common thing that for men specifically, we don't learn how to give ourselves praise or recognition. We don't learn how to actually recognize ourselves. And so we can live our lives constantly seeking it from other people, externally, from women, from the people that we work with, from coaches, etc. And then second, we lack compassion within ourselves. And again, that will show up in our relationships. It'll show up in the women that you date. It'll show up at work where you're constantly trying to get somebody to maybe feel sorry for you or have some level of compassion for you. So those two things are things that we really need to develop within ourselves. And then, yeah, I mean, the ability to move towards some skills, some things that you maybe wouldn't normally prioritize, whether it's dance, whether it's music, whether it's art, whether it's, I mean, I love photography. I've been doing photography for 15 years. And so, I mean, I sang for a number of years and that was great. I traveled the world and got to do that. Uh, and that served me really, really well. And now I do photography and I absolutely love it. So, I think that just helps to balance our nature. It helps to balance our character so that we don't get caught in being so rigid.
I don't know if you must have spent some time listening to Scott Galloway. I think what he's doing with masculinity is really interesting at the moment. But something he said around he believes young men should essentially have a few set of skills that they should have, which is be physically strong. They should also be kind, empathetic. I think his thing was if you're a young man, you should walk into any room and feel like you could kill and eat everyone or outrun everyone. But I'm interested to hear what you think are important skills for men to have right now.
I mean, it's interesting because of the intersection of AI, that I think is just going to decimate a lot of jobs and a lot of the sort of like normal skilled jobs. Like, I think the legal industry is going to get rocked. I think the coding industry is going to get rocked. I think that anything that is a text in, text out, or text in, image out, secretary jobs, those types of things. I mean, AI agents going to replace a lot of those. So I think for a lot of men, not even to just try and find a place in the emerging world that's coming with AI, but just to find a sense of confidence within ourselves, self-esteem, self-worth within ourselves. I think Scott's right to a degree, like there is something very rewarding as a man to be able to walk into any bar anywhere in the world and know I can handle myself. I can handle myself. Like I'm 6'1" and and I'm 190 pounds. I know that if I walk into anywhere in the world, I can kick pretty damn high and pretty damn hard. Like I've trained myself to do that. Like I can kick like a 6'5" dude straight in the noggin. And so that feels good. I don't do it. I'm not going out into bars and looking for fights anymore. That was a little different when I was like 18, 19 years old, growing up in Alberta, Canada. That's just kind of what we did. But there is something to be said for that. So I think you need to have the ability, right? A friend of mine, Trevor Boehm, says, be capable of danger, but don't be dangerous. Be capable of danger, but don't be dangerous. And, I think that is something that when you develop as a man, it just develops your competency and your confidence because you've had to train at something that's put you through the ringer. You've had to meet your own edge. You've had to push yourself. You've had to get uncomfortable. You've experienced discomfort. You've probably been tapped or, you've been caught with a hook once or twice that's like rung your bell and woke you up and you're like, oh, damn, like that really got me. So there's a level of humbling, discipline, structure that comes along with that really sharpens your masculine edge. And then I think the ability to be kind, I mean, that's just what people rank and rate as one of the most important things that they look for in a partner, whether it's men or women. Kindness is just an extremely important trait. And I think one of the challenges that is being that a lot of young men are experiencing right now is that part of the narrative is you don't have to be kind to be a great man, or you don't have to be kind to be good at being a man. And I think that that's nonsense. I think that kindness, um, not in every single moment, but I think developing kindness towards yourself, towards family, towards friends, towards the people that you interact with, I do think that that goes a tremendously long way. And then I think the last thing is really developing a general toolkit of skills. I think the way that AI is moving, and this is just a personal opinion on that front, I think that the men that have very good level of competencies and skills in multiple areas, like a Swiss Army knife, are going to crush. If you are a man that has a really good skill set in marketing, sales, communications, or being able to understand how to build an AI agent and to market and to build a team or a structure, you are going to dominate. You're going to destroy, because it's not enough anymore to just be really good at copywriting. That's not enough. It's not going to be enough anymore to just be really good at closing. You're going to have a couple skills that you have honed and developed. And I think, I look at my past, and one of the things that happened in my life inadvertently, I didn't do this consciously. I wish somebody had told me this when I was like 18 or 19, was I went and did a whole bunch of different jobs that taught me a whole bunch of different skills. I sold vacuums door to door. So I learned the value of being able to talk to anybody about anything and sell them something that they ultimately did not want, right? So risking rejection, the fear of embarrassment, being able to sell things to people. I worked at Apple for a number of years, and I oversaw a bunch of teams there in the retail divisions, and oversaw hundreds of millions of dollars worth of retail stores. And so I got to oversee teams, manage people, and deal with conflict between people. So I got interpersonal skills. The list kind of goes on and on. And so I think one of the things that's made me successful today is that while I don't have some PhD in something or even a master's degree, I definitely have a PhD in experience and apprenticeship in a few different areas that taught me skills that are now invaluable, that so few men have. And I think that that is what a lot of young men, like, one of the things I'm going to teach my son, who's 4 years old now, is go out and find some apprenticeship. Like, I think that traditional apprenticeship and traditional mentorship, you're going to see a massive rise in the next 10 to 15 years. And traditional post-secondary education, I think, is really going to struggle, because the industries are just going to shift so rapidly. And some 18-year-old out of his parents' basement will be able to build AI agents and a business structure and launch $100 million business within the span of a few weeks. And he won't need any post-secondary education to do that, but he will need some apprenticeship. He will need some skill sets that you're going to be able to learn, whether it's through an AI program or finding somebody that's very good at what they do and paying them money to teach you.
Couldn't agree more. I think the value of credibility in your experience is something that's just gonna shine right through. And so with that, how do we find better role models?
Well, I think we have to, I think as men, we have to be very discerning. So there's a couple of things I want to say about this. One, we have to be very discerning about who we're listening to and what we're listening to them for. You might get a part of what you need. Like, let's go back to Andrew Tate. I know a lot of young men at some point listen to him, and you kind of have to listen to anybody through a lens of discernment of, what can I take from this that is beneficial and helpful for me, and what is not? What can I leave? What maybe is trash or just, mental garbage that is not going to be helpful for my life. And so we have to start to have a certain lens of discernment for anybody that we listen to, so that we start to find a deeper connection of who we are, what's authentic for us, what our own level of truth is and understanding. I think learning from the mentors of the past, go read Dostoevsky, go read Carl Jung, go read Nietzsche, go read some of the great philosophers of the past. Go read Marcus Aurelius. All of those men are people that you can learn from, and you can practice challenging their frameworks and thinking about, like, how does that apply to my life? So in the absence of modern role models that are in your life, you can look to ancient role models that have always been there for men throughout history. And then I think lastly, finding a really good mentor or somebody to apprentice with, uh, it is challenging. You know, it is challenging. I've been fortunate to have 3 very, very good mentors in my life that were, all of them happened to be in their early 70s, and they played a huge role in developing me into who I am today. Massive. And so, the thing about that was that, eh, I don't wanna say this, they chose me. I have a lot of men that reach out to me and it's challenging because I'm like, there's a part of me that's still that people pleaser that wants to help every single human being that reaches out to me. Truly, like, I'm like, I will give as much time as I can to support people. But the mentors that I've apprenticed with, they kind of chose me in a way, and I happen to be in their life and in their circle. And so don't underestimate the value of the men that are around you that have a skill set, that have a knowledge, that have a wisdom that you can learn from, that aren't your fathers, that aren't maybe your uncles, but that are in your circle. And you look for the invitation because a lot of the times older men, guys in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, they move into this space where they want to impart knowledge onto the younger generation, and the challenge is that we kind of have a whole bunch of older people, but not a lot of elders. Real elders are the wisdom keepers. We have a lot of olders where they don't really have a lot of skills. They don't really have the knowledge that we're looking for. They give us sort of trite surface level advice, and we can kind of feel like it's BS. So if you're a young man out there that's listening to this, I would say listen to your gut. When you are around a man who has wisdom and insight, you will feel the gravity of it. It actually will, you will experience it differently in your body. There will be like a weight in your torso, in your gut, where you're just like, man, this guy seems to know something or has experienced something that is deeper than the other people that I've been around, and see if you can find ways to be around that person and in their sphere more. Plain and simple, just be around them more. Ask them questions. One of the things that I did with my initial mentor, Bernard, I said, I would just love to pay you for an hour of your time once a week and pick your brain and just ask you questions. And he was like, oh, okay, sure. And then that turned into, a 2-year apprenticeship where I learned about Jungian psychology and a whole bunch of other, therapeutic modalities. But those are the types of things that you want to look for is, does that man carry some level of wisdom and insight that I know I need? And usually it's not like an intellectual thing. It's a felt thing in your gut where you're just like, man, that guy's got something I know I need to learn.
I don't even think sometimes it's in their achievement or what they do, the
No.
place they're in. They don't even have to be in the domain or industry that you wanna go into. I even think about when I went with my therapist, the guy that I ended up choosing was a guy I had this gut feel. I just felt not only was he a great intellect, it was the depth at what he was talking about. I was so interested in what he was talking about. He wasn't gonna actually help me improve my career. He wasn't gonna help me improve any other domain. He was just purely going to stimulate me in a way that made me think deeper, more effectively. And I think the one thing I'd bolt onto to that in finding mentors is friendship, your
Mm,
brotherhood that you go with. You kinda wanna have that group, or at least a group somewhere that does that for you as well.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, the goal of all the work that I do and my organization does is about helping men to grow deeper into themselves, to actually get to know themselves in a much deeper way, aligning to their values, aligning to their ethics, and having a deeper understanding of this is who I am as a man. And that is a journey for a lot of young men. I mean, at 19 years old, I had no idea who I was. And it took me, I mean, maybe some people don't want to hear this, but it took me personally like 12 to 14 years to kind of get a grasp on figuring some of that out. And some men will do it faster than that for sure. For me, I had a lot of stuff that I had to sort through to get a sense of, oh, this is who I am as a man. And that started to arrive in my early 30s. And I think that that's a case for a lot of men. And so give yourself the grace and the space to pursue places, mentors, um, brotherhoods. I mean, we have the Alliance. We've got 1,000 guys from around the world that are doing exactly that. Find places where men are doing that same work. Like-minded men are in pursuit of answering the question, who actually am I? And what am I interested in? And how do I want to operate and contribute in this lifetime?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. As we wrap this up, I'm very conscious of your time because you've got to get away to actually support some of those men. Um, where do we go from here? Where do you want to see things going over, whether it's the next 5 or 10 years?
I think the short answer is we begin to recenter and reprioritize communities, social policies, social situations that actually develop young men into highly competent, highly functioning, highly contributive men within society. And, you know, I think that the communities and the work that you're doing, that I'm doing, I think that those really support. But I do think that we need more substantial change on somewhat of like a policy level to support young men, especially within the education system, because it is just not serving them. And then lastly, I really hope this is just me being optimistic, but I really hope that some of the gender war BS that has been playing out in our culture just starts to get the hell out, like that's enough. Like men hating women, women hating men. I mean, it's just a useless waste of time. The finger pointing across the sexes is a waste of time. It doesn't get us anywhere. It's pushing men and women further apart. And, I think we just need to cut that crap out and grow up a little bit and start to see the value in one another again and start to respect that value. I think that's where I'd really like to see things go.
What's on the horizon for you, and where should we send people?
Yeah. I mean, check out the podcast. It's called the ManTalks podcast. I've got a massive YouTube channel that's been growing quite a bit where you can find a lot of information and, practical videos and work. You can check out the book, Men's Work, or you can just go to mantalks.com, ManTalks, mantalks.com, and everything's there. The online membership's there, the book's there. It's all there.
Connor, I love what you do. Your podcast, the YouTube channel, is a diet of mine, and not only that, my friends, and we end up it being conversations that are great for us to start talking about these things on a more personal basis. So I really appreciate everything you're doing, and keep going. This conversation could have gone forever, so maybe in the future we'll run it back and do another one. But I really really appreciate what you're doing, everyone. Connor Beaton.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed that episode with Connor and you want to enjoy even more episodes of the show, then we've put together a playlist of some of the best episodes that the viewers have recommended themselves. All you have to do is click right here.